Rob, a massive warm welcome. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this.
Thanks so much for having me, Colin.
So let's get started. A couple of big questions and themes that I want to run for. How did you do what you did? Why did you do what you did? What are you planning to do next? And obviously during those conversations, trying to understand from you the approach that you've taken, take the insights out that can be applied, if they can be applied in a corporate environment. So let's just start there. Why don't you just introduce yourself with who you are and what you have done at a very high level? I'm sure everyone who's dialed in already knows, but just in case.
Thanks, Colin. So my name is Rob Paddock, and thanks very much everyone for joining today. It's incredibly humbling. I guess a rather multifaceted career. My undergraduate education was actually in music, and I went on to become a music teacher and a corporate team building facilitator with African Percussion. Was part of a startup in London shortly after varsity. Got some wonderful experience just in the startup realm, and then something kind of interesting happened, which is that I developed tinnitus, which is a perpetual ringing in your ears from the noise damage from all the music over the years. And so at that point, I had to make a very big decision, kind of which direction do you take your life in? Had always had a passion and a love for teaching, and through just a series of fortuitous events, managed to then partner with my brother and my father and my mother to launch a series of online short courses with the University of Cape Town in what was then my dad's business, which was called Paddock's being a property law firm. Those programs were put together with sticky tape and wire, and it was, when you look back at it now, you think, oh, like how did that ever pass? But that was 15 plus years ago, and online education was very much in its infancy. That relationship continued to grow, and off the back of the momentum we were building it with these property law courses, we recognized that there was an immense opportunity for working professionals outside of the property industry to have access to university accredited online courses that could meaningfully add to their career prospects. We recognized that the world of work was rapidly changing, and one of the requirements of modern working professionals was to constantly learn, relearn, and unlearn throughout their lives. And we figured that the combination of a powerful university partner with a flexible and accessible online modality of delivery was an interesting mechanism to meet that need. So we launched Get Smarter. Get Smarter started with a series of short courses with the University of Cape Town. We continued to work with the University of Stellenbosch as well as the University of Witwatersrand, all in the short course domain. We then branched out into, we actually had an interesting period, which maybe, Colin, we can come back to if you're interested, where out of Get Smarter, we then launched the series of 5 other businesses, all EdTech related. But the humbling experience was that 4 of the 5 businesses failed. Thankfully, Get Smarter was still strong. The one that succeeded and continues to exist is a business called Hubble Studios, which I'm still involved in. But we really I think we'd underappreciated what it meant and how lucky you are when you have a business that works. And the sheer kind of convergence of forces and factors that are beyond your control that actually allow a business to be successful. So we continued to grow Get Smarter. We then launched a series of degrees with the University of Cape Town. We then realized that one of our major ambitions was to grow internationally. And so we went on a literal campaign to go get the world's top universities to partner with us. Got our lucky break in 2015 with MIT. We launched the MIT short course in FinTech. That program got 2,900 students from 130 countries around the world. And we literally had to reinvent our business overnight, 24/7 operations, servicing students from every corner of the globe. We had to just about triple our staff base in a matter of months. It was kind of crazy growth. We then continued to get momentum in terms of the university partnerships with Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, London School of Economics, and many more. And ultimately led to the sale of Get Smarter to Nasdaq listed 2U in 2017. Wonderful, incredible learning experience, also very humbling and incredibly tiring. About 6 months after we were acquired, I ended up leaving the business. I mean, honestly, I was just very burnt out. And I think that...
So let's just pause you there, Rob, because we're going to do the stuff after Get Smarter, after 2017. Cool. We've got to keep a few secrets. But I think what I want to know is how much you sold Get Smarter for, to put it in the context of what you have achieved.
We sold it for $103 million.
Can we just say that one more time?
$103 million.
So when you started out, did you ever believe that you would create something which would become so big?
No, I mean, definitely not. No ways. I mean, I think like many entrepreneurs, you're just trying to make sure that you can pay salaries at the end of the month, let alone thinking how in years' time you could have any sort of exit. I think that again, there's this kind of like there's a naivety that's required in starting a business, which is just like a combination of naivety and optimism, which is required to start a business, which, yeah, I guess in the kind of trough of disillusionment that follows that, you realize just how hard this is and how many obstacles there are and how many mountains there are to climb and so on. I would say that probably up until late 2016, I had no concept of the fact that we could actually sell this business. It was literally kind of next proximate objective to next proximate objective, and a lot of it, and because we took very, very little outside funding. In fact, we took no outside funding until 2015. You really are living to make sure that you can pay the next round of salaries and the next round of Google fees and so on. So no, definitely didn't.
Okay, now I know that you're going to say there was a lot of luck, but let's go back to the starting point and unpack that a little bit, because, you know, let's just think through some dates. This was sort of 2007, 2008, when you started to think about creating this platform called Get Smarter.
Well, in fact, it was 2006 that we joined what was then my dad's business and started to launch these series of property courses. That truly, Colin, was a lot of luck. I mean, I think we applied some smarts in the sense that we had some educational background, some technology background and so on. And we were very lucky that my father's an adjunct professor at the University of Cape Town and had deep trusted ties with the law faculty. And you know, the lucky part there was also that we managed to find an individual, a lady called Irene Vassafal within the law faculty, who was incredibly progressive. So in 2006, the idea of universities offering online programs, online was seen as this kind of dirty word, like e-learning was kind of, it was associated with kind of cheap and tacky corporate education. And universities had done very little, especially in South Africa, as it relates to online education at that point. So truly, there was a lot of luck there by having this incredibly visionary stakeholder within the university who was willing to take a chance with us. And thankfully, we offered a product to a market at a time when they actually needed it. So yeah, there was some smart supplied, but a lot of luck.
How much, and that's, I think, a learning point, how important for anyone, it doesn't matter if you're in a corporate or an entrepreneur, is that network? I mean, you also had the benefit, your father was quite instrumental in getting you started as well, for example.
Absolutely huge. I mean, it makes a tangible difference. And I think but what I would relate it back to aspiring entrepreneurs, the question that I'll ask you is, what are the opportunities that are closest to you? One of the challenges with entrepreneurship is it's constantly tempting to think about the fact that the grass is green on the other side. There's some other world that I'm not close to, but in my mind, I can see how it's just going to be huge and how it's going to be this massive opportunity. I guess my reality check for you would be the best opportunities inevitably are the ones that are closest to you, the ones where you actually understand the dynamics of the market. You've been immersed in that space for a while. You've got some existing networks and connections. The game of entrepreneurship is a game of learning. How quickly can you learn and how quickly can you develop your understanding and pivot your product offering and your marketing strategies and so on in order to meet a real market need that people are prepared to pay you more money than it costs you to deliver your product, service, whatever it may be. And those inevitably, this kind of, when you can catapult your learning by actually already being close to a particular market segment or opportunity, it makes a huge difference to the prospects of you actually succeeding.
Yeah. So you've got your network, you've got some experience in this particular field, but we're at the nascent stage of online learning. I think at that point when you were starting down this track, there was no such thing as Udemy. There was no such thing as Coursera. There were online platforms. I think there was things like Open University, being run from the UK, but maybe this is one of the examples which people sort of stood back from and said, maybe that's not a real course. Despite that, I mean, did that never worry you? I mean, that you thought perhaps it's a good idea. It worked in the property side of things, but this is probably too early. It's not actually going to catch on.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And yeah, back in those days, it really was a lot of this. The only real activity in the online space was existing distance learning providers. So you mentioned the Open University. That's an example of a UK university that was a pure distance provider, almost akin to the kind of UNISA of the South African context. Pure distance correspondence learning, you get sent your textbooks and you learn. That was starting to get augmented with some online elements, but that was pretty much the closest thing that was happening in the university space. Colin, yeah, I mean, we were concerned, but what I would say is that the fact that we were able to get such a prestigious university like the University of Cape Town to work with us, the immediate brand credibility and the trust that is inherent in a brand like University of Cape Town, I think for a lot of people helped, a lot of students at that point helped them overcome this kind of concern slash unknown, which was the online modality of delivery. That said, I think that one of the things that it opened up was the opportunity for working professionals to not have to think about going to like a night school or a weekend business school kind of programs in order to effectively upskill themselves. And already at that point, digital had started to infuse our lives in different ways. It started to speed up our daily existence, and time was becoming increasingly scarce. And I think that that's something that is worth reflecting on. Things have sped up a lot in the last 20 years. I mean, even since the year 2000, I matriculated in 2001. I didn't have a cell phone. Like I didn't have a cell phone for the first kind of two years after school. It just wasn't a thing. And so as a result, I wasn't constantly contactable. I wasn't able to do emails on the go. The speed of which life kind of catapulted forward from 2003 onwards shouldn't be underestimated. And I think that finding more efficient and effective mechanisms to reach your customers, in our case through education at that point, that there was a certain ripeness of the market, although they didn't necessarily know what the solution was yet.
Okay, so you've now got introductions into UCT. What precisely was your idea where you thought you could help UCT in their education?
I think that the university has always been, and universities across the globe have always been somewhat limited by who they can geographically attract. There's a logistical and a practical and a financial element to that, which is that if you want to be part of the university, you need to live in the reasonable proximity of the institution. And the same principle generally applied for corporate education as well, with the exception of people who are willing to jump on planes and do kind of week-long programs and so on. That was one of the major value propositions, was just we can extend your reach through a high quality modality of education. And again, we worked very closely with the university in order to define the educational model, the pedagogy behind it, how we would be supporting students, how we would structure our support staff, the nature of the communication channels that would be opened up, and so on and so on. So we worked very closely with the university on that. But I think that one of the realities of and you know, this is not unique to universities, this is true for many bigger corporations, is that you've got a particular kind of set of skills, capabilities, competencies. Your budgets are set very far in advance, and the agility around the edges can be quite challenging. So the idea of just like standing up an online offering is something that generally you need to spend years planning and kind of and implementing. And I think that's also was part of the value proposition, was as a private sector partner coming in, we will work with you to ensure that you have full control over the offering, that you've got full brand oversight, academic oversight, etc. But we will enable this offering with our more agile and nimble capacity, and our some unique skills as it related to online education and the technology that was required, and so on.
So let's go on to that, because now you've got to start during this discussion to actually build something, because you know you've got the idea, you've got the support, the design support, if you want, from what UCT's requirements are. Now you've actually got to put something together in a package online with content, secure, and 1,001 steps that you've had to consider. What's the onboarding process? How does this go? You know, what is the data storage, which is going to cost money? How did you get into that? Because now we're starting to talk some proper dollars to get this up and running.
The one version of the answer was that everything was on a complete shoestring. So we started that entire business with the equivalent of just under 100,000 Rand at that point. And we were, I mean, just incredibly grateful to my dad, whose business it was that we were kind of building out from. And he'd built a solid business over time, and therefore had the cash flow to support this new initiative and so on. So just eternally grateful for what that represented. But then the requirement at that point is keep everything lean. I mean, it was literally the four of us with one marketing person that you just figure your way through everything. So I wouldn't be able to account to you exactly how we did everything, but you know, you have to step back from this. You have to plan to the best degree that you can. And then once you actually get into the detail, you realize that you haven't considered 300 other things. And you have to, you know, I've said often that the role of leadership is problem solving. You know, like most of the time you're just solving problems. You're figuring out there is a picture here and it's currently broken up as a series of puzzle pieces. How do you fit the pieces together within the kind of time constraints, the resource constraints, and so on that you have available.
And where did you find the talent to build it? The coders, or was it a mixture of?
My brother's background was in technology, and he literally did everything to do with the tech. Everything. I mean, and again, when you look back on the stuff now, you think, jeepers, how did we get away with it? But it was, at the time, it was actually quite fairly significant. But no, it was, I guess it was I've said this before as well. I genuinely believe that the primary currency of education is learning, which is then followed by the currency of dollars and rands. That ability to back yourself, to figure out problems, to learn what you need to learn as you're going, and really keep things tight and agile could not be more important in early stage. The other great benefit of that is that when you're the person that's receiving the marketing calls and you're having discussions with potential customers and so on, you're very close to this rich source of insights as to what people are actually looking for, what are their concerns, what are their current bandwidth constraints, and so on. So that you're constantly, because you're involved in so many of the details, you're able to pivot and iterate. You're offering quite literally in real time as you're going. The detraction from that, of course, is that you work yourself into the ground and it's not sustainable at all, and so on. But at the early stages, I guess that would be just a strong point of encouragement. You can't afford to you can't afford to get far away from your customers. And it's actually incidentally a bit of a mistake that I've made now launching this next business, which I've now very quickly course corrected from. But it's very tempting to think, oh, let me raise some capital and we'll get the team, we'll build it out, and you guys do your thing and I'll do my thing. You really have to stay close to the ground in the early stages.
So stay close to your customers, make sure that you're working in your sort of passion, what you're connected to, make sure that you're using your network, 3 massive advantages. Another piece that startups always talk about is burn rate and making sure that you have an end date. If this doesn't go well, we're going to call it a day in June 2000, whatever. Did you have an end date where you thought, we're just going to run this, and once we get through the 100,000 round, if it's not working, we'll close shop and do something else, get a boring job?
Because we were lucky and we saw that the registration started coming in quite early, no, we didn't. We weren't forced to think about that. I can tell you with other businesses that have failed that I have had that experience, and it's critical. I think you've always got these kind of inflection points where it's either we carry on and we believe in the future, even though there's always risk and nothing is ever certain, or I guess there's 3 options. Or you kind of see this end point, you've tried your best, you close up shop. Third use case potentially is we've learned a lot and we've figured out that this iteration of our product isn't the correct one for what the market is looking for. But if we change these 3 things, we feel sufficiently close to the market now that if we were to pivot, we believe that we can meet a real market need. And that might at that stage then mean beg, borrowing, stealing, raising some capital, etc., to further the runway. But I think it's a very dynamic, fluid process, Colin. I don't think that there's any one set of rules that one can apply across the board. That you run out of money, and that's it. You can't pay salaries, you can't deliver your service, and so on. So there's a very finite point where if you can't either get more money from customers or raise more capital or beg, borrow, steal to kind of float the business, you will close. So I mean that almost is a given. But in between here and there, I think there's a lot of steps and opportunities to course correct. And again, that's what I would say is the most important requirement of an entrepreneur, is to stay close and to be willing to course correct and to not be so attached to your idea that through ego you continue to pursue a path that is not showing efficacy.
So 2 of the things that I think, or one combined if you want, that I think really differentiated Get Smarter from even the Coursera's and Udemy's that came later, was the fact that you have detailed insights about what the learners are actually doing through the platform. And you have course correction through mentors, not teachers necessarily, almost like a CRM oversight of what those learners are doing. When did you come up and find that piece? Because a lot of courses just throw content out there and they get really low rates, 10, 15% maybe complete it. Your course completion rate at the relevant standard for UCT, which drove them forward, was around 90%. So when was it you found this sort of magic secret ingredient? Was it right from the start?
It was very, very early on, Colin. So that again, just huge credit to my brother. It was fairly rudimentary in the beginning, but even with I think one of the great affordances of online education is this ability to track and monitor how students are progressing, with a level of let's call it data accuracy that is very difficult to glean in the traditional classroom. Teachers have to rely on a very kind of intuitive sense of how students are faring, and that gets harder in fact, not just harder, that becomes impossible to scale if you start to move it beyond kind of the 30 odd students within the classroom and so on. In the online modality, that of course, and I don't need to tout the benefits of big data, I think it's obvious, but that is a very real opportunity in the world of teaching and learning online right now. Our earlier start with that, Colin, was just simple metrics like, have you logged in every day or not? Like, not even down to what was your relative participation rate in the discussion forums relative to your peers, to what degree were you initiating conversations versus responding to conversation. I mean, you can get amazing levels of granularity now that we've developed over time. But in the early days, just like, did you log on or not? And from there, it was proactive reminders like, you've got an assignment coming up on Wednesday, it's Monday, and I see you haven't yet downloaded your assignment that you need to complete. This is a nudge to keep you on track. So there's this kind of, there's a coaching element. So we refer to these individuals as course coaches. We've now kind of amended that to be kind of student success managers. But the idea of having a coach who's taking a personal interest in how you are faring, they're not a subject matter expert, and that's not the expectation. They typically come from a counseling, coaching, or psychology background, and their role is to keep you on track with your studies. And I think it's easy to underestimate the fact that people are super busy in this day and age, and pushing yourself in the context of learning is actually it's a process that makes you quite vulnerable. I mean, anytime you're really going to make magnificent leaps in terms of your own learning, it's because you've allowed yourself to kind of expose yourself to a set of activities and engagements where you don't yet have the capacity, the capabilities, and there's an insecurity that comes with that. So for a lot of us, my diagnosis has been that a lot of the things that hold us back from learning is not our intellectual capacity to engage. It's the more kind of insecurity and heartfelt elements of just like not feeling confident or comfortable enough to go. So these coaches, enabled by learning analytics, but then amplified by their kind of psychology and counseling skills, their role is really to connect with the students on a human to human level and believe in them. You know, we often refer to them as our students' #1 cheerleaders. And that makes a huge difference. And in the traditional classroom, it's one of the functions that teachers perform, but it's a totally separate conversation. But I strongly believe teachers do way too many things. Like their job description includes about 15 different job titles, which at least from my estimation is one of the reasons that education currently doesn't scale. And one of the things that I'm obsessed about solving through businesses like Get Smarter and now Valencia.
So when you were going, I mean, you've opened up a whole rabbit warren of potential paths we can go down now, because the things that you've just explained there weren't even things. So you're running effectively tech-driven nudges to go and encourage your customers to do. There's no AI, so you've got big mapping tables, I assume, sitting there going, if this event happens, do this. So you must have been putting a lot of time in that. At some point, you then step back and you go, whoa, let's go and bring in some real people, because we're getting the data, so we've got to go and do that. And then that starts to manifest. There's a thing here because we're seeing an uptick in the data. So you're already doing a test, learn, iterate model as you're experimenting things. I'm not sure how popular that was then. You've now got this decision to make, because you need more people for this to operate and to get these high pass marks. How did you decide whether you should hire them or whether you should effectively crowdsource them and bring them in and so that you can scale? What was the decision for that?
No, we did. And I'd love to say that there was more science behind it, Colin, but at that stage, it's like, cool, we actually are, there is a business here. We're generating revenue. It's clear. I mean, we knew we needed 30 students to break even, and we ended up getting 290 on that first presentation. So at that point, yeah, we're hiring, we're putting people in place. We had these kind of, these coaches from the get-go. Exactly what they were doing was TBD, but we certainly hired some additional capacity from the get-go. It was really, the build stage was probably the time that before it was clear that this thing was viable, was probably the most lean time. Okay.
Now you start growing, you start going from there's 200 students to hundreds of thousands of students over the years. So how did you handle that growth? How did you make sure that this tight ship that you started with, where you've employed everyone, is excellent quality, very well supported with your anchor tenant clients, and you've now got tens, then potentially hundreds of clients, and the hundreds of thousands of end clients, B2B2C, that are now on the platform? How did you try to organize that so that it was still awesome quality?
Yeah, jeepers. I mean, there's so many angles that we could take to answer that question. I would start with this one, though. It's always fundamentally a human challenge. When we think about supporting, in this case, kind of fast scaling organizations and so on, it's always a human challenge. And so you need to start with the organization, the selection of the humans and the organization of the humans. So I would say to anyone who's built a business or who is building a business, there are these kind of step changes that you experience. When it's you leading a business and you've got kind of somewhere between about 10 and 20 people, often you can actually keep your reporting lines quite clear. They report into you, you keep track of everything that's going on, and at a certain point that breaks. And that, in my experience, is generally around kind of 15 to 20 people. You then need to start introducing a layer of middle management, which means that you've got to kind of in between reporting lines who start to oversee functional areas, and they then have individuals who report into them, and that's another modality that can kind of allow you to get to about 70 people. Then from 70, you start to have to introduce things like kind of a product focused areas across functional lines, and that starts to change your organizational structure again, which means that can generally stand you in good stead to about 150. And from 150, there's another leap then from up to about 300 people, and from 300, at least my experience is that a lot of the kind of systemic org structure pieces can actually sustain you quite far towards the thousands of employees and so on.
So you've made a really good point. I'm going to just ask you a question to fit in there. How did you keep the authenticity, the experimentation, the kind of startup mentality as you're starting to layer your organization with these structures?
Great point. And we didn't. It was kind of like a constant kind of to and fro course, like overcorrect, swing the other way, etc. As you're scaling up and business is growing and there's a freneticism on the ground, there's a part of me in my naivety, and I think, but I can speak for my brother and I on this, that probably more me, where you try to get to the point where it's like the end goal is that everything works, everything's got its like nice box and it works and people understand what their tasks are for the week and there can be some sort of continuity in the way that people work and so on. You kind of try to then operationalize everything and you put better systems in place and you say, let's slow down on growth so that we can kind of have a year of consolidation and so on. It's such a load of nonsense in a scale up environment. I think the strong learning from my perspective that I would share with others is that if you're in a high growth business, you need to know what you're signing up for. It is constantly going to be changing. Just as you've resolved one thing and you've operationalized one thing, another thing is going to break or another opportunity is going to become available. There is never an endpoint where everything just works beautifully and people can arrive at their desk and have a predictable day and 8 till 5 and I go home. It just doesn't exist. At least not if you have major growth ambitions. So the first piece there is just get the cultural expectations right. We now, when we hire into Valencia, we have this section of our hiring process which is called realities of the role, where we actually try to unsell people on the idea of joining us. Like, listen, I really want you to understand what a day in the life here is like. And because, it's often said that dissatisfaction is the chasm between expectations and reality. And if you can get that expectation right and people know what they're signing up for, then that chasm doesn't exist. And in that context, if you've got the right people coming in who can thrive and who can feel inspired and energized by this fast growth environment where there is so much learning that's taking place and we're being stretched and pulled and so on, that's what you want. But it's that expectation management, Colin, that just couldn't be more important. You've got to get people in who know what they're signing up for.
So that's a good time. And we've got some questions coming through, which I've actually got to remember to ask. Otherwise, I'll be told off. And they are great questions. Do you think purposeful organizations are going to, outperform their profit-driven peers? Is this a key marker that's been important for you?
So I guess it's quite a binary question, and I wouldn't mind introducing some nuance into it, which is that I do believe that profit and purpose can coexist and they should exist. I mean, quite frankly, they have to exist. Like unless you've got some government state funding or some invisible angel investor who's prepared to just keep pumping money into your business, like you have to be profitable. At least at some stage you have to be profitable, maybe temporarily buoyed by venture capital and so on, but you have to get to profitability and sustainability. Incidentally, it's one of our company values at Valencia is that profitability is sustainability. And so I think that, at least from my perspective, those two things need to coexist. But one of my reflections is that if you want to attract the best talent in this day and age, and if you want to attract a younger audience, if you don't have purpose very much at the front and center of your narrative. And it can't be in fancy one-liners or adverts or values that exist on a wall and that no one refers to and so on. It has to be in the lived experience and has to be shown authentically through the work that you are actually doing as opposed to what you're saying. I think that the tide is turning for companies like those. I think that, I mean, there's many ways we can cut and slice this, but even where there's major breaches of trust in companies like Facebook and so on right now, it's like you're going to find yourself in trouble. And I think that companies increasingly, one of the leadership challenges is to be authentic with your employees and authentic with your customers. I mean, I can tell you that there are hundreds of things that we're not doing well at Valencia right now, and that still Get Smarter is not doing well. But when there's authenticity of leadership and when there's an openness to just being human and speaking your truth and being vulnerable in the way that you portray yourself and open about the things that you're aspiring towards and the impact that you're trying to have and the things that you're grappling with while you try to reach those objectives, I think that's what a lot of people want. And so I guess to take your question a little bit in the direction that you didn't ask, but I believe that the most impactful companies right now are ones that have more than a profit motive, but as importantly, if not more importantly, are willing to be incredibly transparent about that to their employees and to their customers about how they're grappling to get there. Because the truth is that with purpose, you almost never get there. Like you never fully fulfill that purpose piece and that impact piece. And you've got to manage these very real tensions in the business between like paying salaries at the end of the month and making sure there's runways, just launch the next marketing campaign and have a real impact and give back to society and so on. And I don't think that that's something that's just like, that's either or that you can just blatantly ignore one or the other. I think that people want to see leaders tussling and grappling with the tension point that creates. And again, I think that what employees in the market is looking for is authenticity around that.
Well, we're going to have to introduce you to Charles Savage and many of the other previous speakers, because you're going to have some good conversations. He's the CEO of Easy Equities, and a lot of what you're saying resonates with what I've seen them doing as they've had their successes. Let's touch on some of these questions here. Where's it gone now? One of them was talking about collaborating. Yes, here we go. In your personal experience, did you harness the collective intelligence of your peers and collaboration partners to solve some of these problems that you were talking about?
Great question. And we didn't get to it when we were talking about the kind of scale up piece. And I mentioned that it's always a human issue. And one of the questions is from a human issue, how you organize yourselves. As important, if not more important, is the degree to which you can create learning environments for people to learn. Like your ability to learn precedes your ability to have operational and financial success and so on. So without question, I think one of the key requirements of a leader is to bring the outside in. And when I say leader, people need to lead themselves as much as they need leaders within the organizations, but to bring the outside in and to bring in intelligence and insights and to engage in mentorship with people who have been down the road and who you can learn from and so on, it could not be more important in order to enable business success. So certainly those sorts of collaborations, that ability to learn from people around you, to infuse, to fill in the knowledge gaps and so on, I believe is, I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. Learning is the primary currency of business, which is then followed by rands and dollars.
I'm just making a note of that because that's a saying we're going to have to quote you on many times after this call. Tell me about your next venture. Actually, before we go into that, if I can ask, you've gone through this effort, you've had incredible success. You've said elsewhere, so I don't need to ask it now, about how tiring it was as you flew around the world and meetings after meetings and burnout and all the issues that go with that. But having got over that hump, it felt like you had anyway, 2016, 2017, you decide to sell. What was the basis for that? Because you were, to me, you were just starting at the near the curve to really accelerate.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I don't know that we'll ever know whether we made exactly the right decision, exactly the right time, and so on. I think that the business has continued to grow magnificently. We really created the engine and the capacity for that J-curve growth. Equally, Colin, yeah, to the points that you've mentioned, at that point, it was a decade plus, and it was never obvious that we had at least to me, it was never obvious that we had a significant business. Like, again, you kind of constantly as an entrepreneur, you're aware of the kind of 4 or 5 things that if they had to happen in quick succession, the whole house of cards could come tumbling down. So you're constantly living with that kind of stress. And now you've got approaching 1,000 employees, and that's a very big salary bill at the end of every month, and you feel the weight of responsibility when it comes to that. So the prospect of being able to realize the kind of capital value of the business that we built, the opportunity to de-risk all the time, effort, and so on that we put in over the decade that preceded that, and so on, is very tempting. And so, yeah, I think probably the thing that sealed it for us was just Chip Pausick and the team at 2U, who are just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we really got incredibly lucky with the company that acquired us. We saw a cultural familiarity in him. He was a owner-founder of his own business. He walked the entire entrepreneurial journey himself, gone to list his business in the States and so on. And the team underneath him, we felt a sense of kinship with, where we actually trusted that if we came together, we'd actually be better together. We would provide even more opportunity for the team on the ground and the students that we were servicing to really expand. And I think that gave us a sense of comfort, and combined with the fact that, you know, tiredness and risk and so on, it was time to I guess, realize the capital value of the business.
So you decided at that point to step away and to embark on some new ventures, which we'll ask about in a minute. Your brother stayed, presumably with the aim of staying for many years afterwards in the CEO type space, but then he also eventually stepped away too. Why was that? Is this classic sort of, you know, you can't just marry two kind of startup and a you know where I'm going on that, the Facebook versus, you know, WhatsApp scenario where you see it time and again, you've built it, it just doesn't gel now working in the mothership.
Yeah. And again, to use great credit, I think that they created all the enabling environments for us to continue to do what we were doing and so on, and to benefit from their exceptional capabilities, capacity, relationships, and so on. So it's no reflection of them. I think that your world just so fundamentally changes when you no longer have absolute creative control of the business, and you've gotten quite used to that control, and that your personal financial circumstances have changed to the point where you can actually think differently about what you do and why you do it, and where you're going to spend your time, and other things that you might be passionate about, and other businesses that you might want to start, and so on. It gives you the luxury of headspace to start thinking about those things. And I would say, again, not because of anything at 2U, but rather because of the personal change that happens in you when you realize a kind of capital event like this, that it's so commonplace with owner founders who then sell to not continue with the business. Also because you've wrapped up so much of your identity in this business, and now it's no longer yours. Even if you still have a lot of kind of daily operational control, it's no longer yours. And there's something in it that is it's difficult to describe. It's a terrible analogy, but it's almost like the baby that you have nurtured for all these years is suddenly taken over by someone else, and you're still involved in their lives, but they live somewhere else. It's like, there's a sense of distance, and again, it's a terrible analogy, but it's the closest I've managed to find in terms of the feeling that one incurs.
Yeah, I suppose you don't see that very often. Zappos was a good example. Their CEO passed away, didn't he, last year? But he managed to keep his baby. Amazon gave him plenty of space. You see it rarely. Oh. Okay, you've stepped away now, and there's this big breath of fresh, freedom. I don't feel pressured anymore. It's not going to fall apart, which must have been absolutely lovely. But then you go and say, let's go and set up a school online, where the way I look at it, you're taking even more responsibility, because this isn't just a set of courses fitting into this is your education. This is your matric. How did you get into this idea about going into that space?
Yeah, I guess the one thing I'd reflect on for people is that there is this absolute fallacy, I believe, in our culture, which is that there is this North Star, which is make a bunch of money so I can retire early and I can finally have some time and I will do all the luxurious things that I've ever planned to do and so on. And I can tell you firsthand that it's a fallacy. It's making money, and this is in no way a complaint at all. This is a problem of privilege, but it solves a bunch of problems and it introduces a whole bunch more. And we could have a completely separate conversation about that, but I can assure you it's absolutely true. One of the things that I found in having the spaciousness was, first of all, it was wonderful because I needed to recuperate. I spent a stack of time with my family and with my friends and with my wife, and mended relationships, and things that had been just kind of pushed to the side because of such a strong business focus for a long time really got the attention that they needed. The problem is that as a human, you stagnate. When you don't have something to rub up against and you're not challenged and challenging yourself, you find yourself slipping backwards. You find yourself kind of the idea of kind of idle hands. I mean, I ended up getting super involved in like Ironman triathlons and kind of pushing myself in other areas. I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm looking for a challenge because it makes you feel plugged in, and you feel that sense of growth and that expansion and so on. But no one else is benefiting from this. I mean, like, so what if I come 500th in the Ironman? You know, like big blimmin' deal. And I think that again, the fallacy and I think the opportunity is to recognize that the opportunity is in the challenge. The opportunity and what we should relish about life is in response to the things that we're still grappling with the kind of people and circumstances that come into our life that represent an opportunity to kind of figure out where you're not yet free, where you still have room to grow, where you still have an opportunity to expand. And without having, at least for me personally, without having work as one of those main areas of growth, I would say that kind of it's not a good thing.
So how did you come up with the idea for volunteer, and what was the problem that in your mind you're trying to solve there's a gap for?
Yeah, so in looking around then and wanting to get meaningfully involved again, had a good look at obviously my passion is in education. I wanted to continue in the path of education and education technology. Truth be told, Colin, this is an idea that's been rummaging around the back of my head for the last kind of 8 years. And finally, there was the time and space to actually start thinking about it properly, start putting some pen to paper, raise some capital. The problem that as I see it, is that online schooling hasn't nearly met its potential yet. Online schooling generally is an experience where people kind of have some content online that's dumped there. They can wade their way through it as and when they fancy. It's kind of like an extension of a homeschooling model with a little bit of tech added. And whilst it introduces a bunch of flexibility for the parents and the students, it's fundamentally a compromised educational experience. And I think that the fantastic experience that we had building Get Smarter was that you don't have to compromise. You can have a high-touch, socially rich online learning experience where students are connecting from all corners of the globe, collaborating around solving real-world problems in a rich environment where there's a real sense of student community, ethos, purpose, and so on. And you can put all of that together. And so I guess that was the problem that we were seeking to solve. So started the Valencia Institute. We launched in September 2019. And we had our first cohort start with us in January 2020. And then, of course, COVID hit in March of 2020, and the world of online schooling just kind of exploded since then. And again, like, super lucky to be in that space at that time. We put some hard effort into getting there, and we were there to be in the game. But yeah, it's been a super interesting experience ever since.
And this is for children who are what, 14 to 18?
Currently high school students only. We are going to be expanding that in the future, but anywhere between ages 12 and 19, we accept students into our high school program.
Okay, and you obviously chose, the South African exams to lead them on to.
So in fact, we have started with the British curriculum, and we are building out a version of the South African curriculum for a version of our offering, which I can't speak too much about yet, but will be coming online pretty soon. Yeah,
and how's the pickup been? Because obviously a lot of parents are going to buy into this. I do. I would love to put my children into this. This is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this as well, because I really want to go and explore this, but it would be an experiment because it's new.
Totally.
And you've got this nice, and at your price tag, it's still probably mainly for people who've got children in private schools. I know you want to democratize it further. So you've got this kind of, here's a school which is traditional, and the network's awesome. And that's as much about why a lot of people put them into those types of schools. Here's something which is new and fresh, potentially better education, but gosh, there's a bit of risk here. What happens future? How do you get over that with the parents that are thinking about and concerned about that?
Completely. And I think that the short answer is that traditional schools are wonderful for many students. They just don't work for everyone. I don't think that our online school is suitable for all kids with all kind of personality traits and extracurricular interests and so on. I think what I'm constantly trying to be clear about is that there's a subsegment of the current traditional school market for whom the kind of brick and mortar traditional mechanisms aren't optimized for who they are. And I think that in many of those cases that a school like Valencia offers a really fantastic alternative for those students. So, you know, we've got interesting use cases of students who are exceptional sports people who need fundamentally more flexibility in the way that their education happens. We've got students whose parents are multinational corporates.
I'm assuming that's exceptional sports people, not in rugby or cricket and the traditional sports where some of the schools tend to focus.
Completely. So, I mean, I mean, we've got an unbelievable golfer. We've got an unbelievable tennis player. We've got a skateboarding champion, and many other examples like that. So it's often your kind of your less traditional school boy or girl school sports. Certainly, but then again, like sons and daughters of international multinational corporates, you've got individuals who have more of a fluid kind of identity and gender identity who are looking for a more inclusive environment. You've got students for whom they've experienced a lot of bullying and social anxiety in a face-to-face environment and so on. So there's so many use cases. I'm mentioning kind of 3 of about 10 use cases and persona types that we find we provide just a magnificent alternative mode of delivery for.
Are you applying the same model that, sorry, I don't know, are you applying the same model that you learned right at the start where we said, you know, that playing within your network, that foundational tenant that helps you? What is your UCT equivalent in this case? The test, fail, learn sort of approach, using the community to collaborate, getting closer to your clients?
I mean, this is the amazing thing, Colin. I would say that one of the big mistakes that I've made in this business is not staying close enough to the coalface in early days. One of the luxuries of having a bit of capital behind you and being able to raise some venture capital because you now have a reputation and so on, is that I've allowed myself to get further away from the coalface, which means that we have made some mistakes that I'm now deeply committed to course correcting. But it's very interesting, even from the first business to the second business, there's now a whole new set of learnings because the context is different and because the capital availability is different and so on. And I think this is the magnificent thing about continuing to build businesses is the fact that you continue to learn. It's never just like, oh, I've mastered it all in this last one. Let me just apply all the principles I've learned in this new one. It's not like that at all. I'm certainly not making many of the same mistakes again, but still making plenty of mistakes.
What's your view on Matric or A Levels? And where I'm going there is these are, what would you call them? They're steps on your ladder. These are the certificates that you have in the same way your driving license gets you on the road.
Yeah.
But when I look at where the world is moving, it feels a little bit antiquated because there are so many skills we need our children to have to be taught and practically for them to be useful in the new world that we're moving into, which are completely unrelated to a certificate.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess there's a couple of ways to answer that. The one is that in part, it depends on what we're talking about, whether it's a national senior certificate or an A-levels examination and so on. I mean, there's one horrendous stat that everyone should be aware of is a national senior certificate statistically gives you no better chance of getting a job than not having one at all, which is really terrifying right now. And I think it speaks to the fact that we need to think differently about what constitutes our matric exams, or what subjects and the degree to which those are examined at and so on. But there is this deeply ingrained kind of institutional challenge, which is that you have these endpoints of something like a school, which then results in some sort of qualification standard that is then seen as the expectation or the ticket to get into something like tertiary education. And then from tertiary, you've got this endpoint certificate, which is your ticket to get into jobs and so on. The problem is in the disjoint between the different subsectors. And this is something that again, I can't speak too much about, but that we're looking to meaningfully solve in the not too distant future is what is an augmented matric certificate look like that genuinely addresses the issues that students experience at an undergraduate level, and as an alternative could provide you with an opportunity to fast track your way into a digital economy relevant skill right now. There are ways of thinking about that, but it takes full systems it requires you to think about the full systemic challenge and to make sure that you bring in the right stakeholders from the different sectors to make sure that you're fixing the issues in the joining points. and that's something I'm super, so sorry, I realize I'm kind of speaking in quite theoretical terms. And again, if you watch what we're doing at Valencia over the next 2 months, you'll see some exciting stuff there. But really, I think that we need to think very differently about what the future of credentials look like. I think that if we're not starting with the end in mind, which is the economic productivity of these learners and their ability to actually develop the skills and attributes, less even the technical capabilities, but more the kind of personality traits, attributes, and so on that the world of work is actually looking for, I think we're in very, very, very big trouble. And the good news is that it's solvable. The bad news is that you've got to engage multiple stakeholders throughout the kind of value chain to make sure that you create that alignment. But with the right work, it's absolutely possible.
Do you think we're going to get to a point with people like you and others where education can truly be democratized so that we don't have this multi-tier system? Like you said at the very start, you've got a big, step up when you're trying to do something if you know the right people. And education's a really important part of that to help you to get to know and build that network. So education has a massive limiting effect on people that don't get the opportunity to get one or get a poor one. Absolutely. Now, I know you're doing stuff, and we're kind of running out of time here, but do you think we'll ever get to a point where technology allows this to be democratized?
I think that it's going to take us significantly further towards that gold standards of truly leveling the playing field. It requires very bold steps from not just people in the education sector, but others as well. I couldn't be, it's one of the things that drive me towards this space at the moment. And you mentioned that we have quite a lot going on in terms of the kind of the private school model. 90% of my time at the moment is being focused on this low fee segment where there is massive opportunity to infuse the efficiencies and the effectiveness of digital technologies coupled with real human support to really democratize education further. It's going to ultimately require collaborations and integration with government and funding support and so on to really get it to that kind of fee-free space. But Colin, it's possible. It's absolutely possible, but without the smart and purposeful integration of technology, it is not. We cannot build enough schools or capacitate them fast enough with the right teachers in order to solve the education crisis. Let's speak about South Africa right now. We cannot do it with the brick and mortar model alone. We simply won't get there.
Well, I'm absolutely certain that Stephen Van Coller, his colleagues at EOH and IOCO, who are sponsoring and running this series, are going to want to chat to you under their mission and purpose of Solve. I'm absolutely certain about that. Joe, let's bring you on. What's your question? Oh, I didn't run a poll. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's too late.
Good thing I'm a poll, so you're good. I'll pick up your question on my side. Maybe just one thing, completely energized by what you've said, Rob, and I think specifically having school-going children and those that have just finished school, so 2021 this year, you resonate with me across the board. And I think if we could change their minds and lives and opportunities for 9-year-olds, they say you can change the world before they're hardwired. And what you've said, together with Nassim Taleb's quote around we should reward people, not ridicule them for thinking the impossible, you epitomize that. So I'm genuinely excited, and we will talk to you more. But the question I have is, it's about staying close to your customers, stay close to passion, stay close to your network leverages, stay close to your end date, stay close to your burn rate. How do you stay together? In 60 seconds, how do you do it?
Most important thing is viewing all of these challenges as opportunities for growth. There's a mindset that if you create an inner friction in response to the endless plethora of challenges that present to any entrepreneur, you will create a lot of additional stress, a lot of additional tension, and so on. The alternative is that all of those challenges, problems, etc., still exist, but you're energized by the opportunity to solve them, and you see them as an opportunity wherever friction comes up inside you as an opportunity to grow. In addition, you've got to take care of your body. You've got to exercise. Like for me, I need to sauna. I need to cold immersion. I need to make sure that inflammation doesn't get out of control in my body. I need to eat good food. Really, really important. And you've got to sleep. The idea that you can do all of this and not sleep is really, really foolhardy. Like, don't do it. Sleep. You have to sleep. You'll be more effective as an entrepreneur.
If you could work from anywhere and school from anywhere, you can definitely make time to fit in sleep. So our deepest gratitude. Thank you, Rob, for your time and your insights. Thank you, Colin, for your facilitating the session and for your education in music. I'm still not sure where the first theme song comes from. And thank you to everyone. Play it at the end. And thank you to everyone for participating. I think a special shout out. We've got a number of our guests on the call, our clients too. So you've got UKZN, Sasol, IBM, Norset Finance, PSG, Bro, ABN Bev, Avis Budget, Love Life, Dell, EQ, Exponential, ID3, our own EOH family. It really has been a great time out, I think, in terms of away from our keyboards and literally time to learn. You did say it's the human factor that's critical, and we are human first. So really appreciate that. Please be back next week. We speak to Stafford Massey. He's the general manager of We Work South Africa around purposeful leadership in unicorns. I'm intrigued already. And the success of this series is very much due to everyone here. People on the call, it wouldn't be possible without you. So once again, a really big thank you to everyone. 1 minute to spare. We're getting smarter, sharper, faster, and we will be watching for the press to see what unfolds, Rob. So thank you very much. Have a good afternoon all.
And in case you wondered what the music was, it was Grange Hill. Obviously, no one brought up in England in my generation, one of the most dangerous schools to be at. And please leave your thoughts about the call on the chat line. The feedback is very much needed, and we do listen to it. Thank you very much.